Hello there and welcome to you, wherever you may be. I hope you're doing well this week. It is extremely strangely quiet here in the UK for some reason. It's like everybody's disappeared, maybe on holiday, and we had a little eclipse action in England. I did go around this week to one of the National Trust properties called Itham Moat, which is in Sevenoaks, just south of London. And it was built in 1300 by a genuine knight who used to pray 7 times a day with the whole household. That was a long time ago. Well, I've got some Ouspensky this week. I'll begin with one passage where he tries to relate the psychic world to the physical world, and he mentions snowflakes, and we'll talk about the categorization of snowflakes into 7 categories. And I have some passages about Gurdjieff, one which relates to the importance for civilizations to be long-lived, that they develop fine qualities, and another one about the difficulties of aging and being on the path, practical things. And then there is another passage by Ouspensky where he talks about the visible and the invisible world. And I have just added into the schedule the beginning of the first discourse by the Buddha, as if I had just noticed something rather obvious about it. So that's the pastrami sandwich for today. I hope you all enjoy it. At the present day, it is often said we know nothing about the exact nature of the relations between the physical and psychic phenomena. The only thing we can affirm, and which is more or less established, is that for every psychic process, thought or sensation, there is a corresponding physiological process which manifests itself in at least a feeble vibration in nerves and brain fiber, and in chemical changes in different tissues. Sensation is defined as the consciousness of a change in the organ of sense. This change is a certain motion which is transmitted into brain centers, but in what way that motion is transformed into a feeling or a thought is not known. The question arises, is it not possible to suppose that the physical is separated from the psychic by 4-dimensional space, i.e. that a physiological process passing into the domain of the 4th dimension produces these effects which we call feelings or thoughts? There exists indeed in nature a very interesting phenomenon which gives us perfectly correct diagrams of the 4th dimension. It is only necessary to know how to read these diagrams. They are seen in the fantastically varied but always symmetrical shapes of snowflakes, and also in the design of flowers, stars, ferns, and lacework which frost makes on window panes, drops of water settling from the air onto a cold pane, or on the ice already formed upon it, begin instantaneously to freeze and expand, leaving traces of their motion along the 4th dimension in the shape of intricate designs. These frost drawings on window panes, as well as the design of snowflakes, are figures of the 4th dimension, the mysterious a to the power 4. The motion of a lower figure to obtain a higher one, as imagined in geometry, is here actually realized, and the resulting figure in effect represents the trace left by the motion of the lower figure, because the frost preserves all the stages of the expansion of freezing drops of water, forms of living bodies, living flowers, living ferns that created according to the same principles, though in a more complex order, the outline of a tree gradually spreading into branches and twigs, as it were, a diagram of the 4th dimension, a to the power 4. Leafless trees in winter or early spring often present very complicated and extraordinarily interesting diagrams of the 4th dimension. We pass them without noticing them because we think that a tree exists in 3-dimensional space. Similar wonderful diagrams can be seen in the designs of seaweeds, flowers, young shoots, certain seeds, etc., etc. Sometimes it is sufficient to magnify them a little in order to see the secrets of the great laboratory that are hidden from our eyes. Well, I looked this up, and a Japanese man called Yukichiro Nakaya, 1900 to 1962, had photographed thousands of snowflakes and finally categorized themselves into 7 categories according to the stages of their growth, as if they were growing towards a perfect form which required 7 steps. And different snowflakes had been arrested at different gravity centers. I'll just leave some diagrams here if you want to know a bit more, but you can see from them that the snowflake grows like a living creature, with all those steps that Gurdjieff has talked about, with all the characteristics and transformations. Which is very reminiscent of Chun-Kil-Tes and his brother's work. Whilst I'm on the subject of China, they have very clear practical methods to deal with the octave. They have very deep knowledge. This morning I was doing some practices that are quite similar to Jesus' verbatim esoteric practical instructions that nobody understands. But I sense that those particular instructions come from a truly distant time when the goals of people were so different to ours that they could only be considered to be highly supernatural. There was a partial eclipse in England last week, and I was high up in a churchyard watching it quite comfortably. It was a little disappointing because it didn't get that dark. But after the peak, when the sun was at its darkest, looking into the churchyard at the light that was cast there, it was clear to me that there was a mixture of the moonlight, which has a certain clawing and ethereal nature. Now, what is that? Everybody knows the ethereal nature of moonlight, but what does it really mean? Is that it's yin, but it's also drawing you to it. It is taking something. Whereas the sun is a pulsing, flowing, positive river that is drowning us in yang energy. And when the flows are together during an eclipse, they somehow merge into one flow. And that is actually a practice that is done in Taoism, to mix together the energy of the sun and moon, do things with the resulting mixture. Last week I was doing some DIY on some shelves and so on, and feeling that I had exerted myself, I was walking up to the shops afterwards with my legs canted apart, proud of myself, and I took this opportunity to bring to mind all my enemies and how I was going to show them what is what. Because that's what I do, after a little bit of man's work. And it's all nonsense, and there's a lot of that in my head. For some reason, today and in the last year, I can see it and separate from it and understand it in a more mature way. That is not what I want. All that stuff is very unhelpful. And it comes with a lot of jazz, because it's coming from the false self, the many eyes. And it's used to being like that. And I'm used to being identified with it, but somehow I've become more mature and I can separate from it. And Gurdjieff says that a very important stage on the work is when you can separate the real self, which is in the body, from the false. And it's at that point that you can understand what he means by nullity, because if all that jazzy stuff, aggressive stuff, is what you think you are, then that is not helpful. People talk about remembering the real self, I hope, but there's also a part of it that needs to be forgotten. And I am getting older, and I'm very grateful for having had the experience of being to many retreats and being quite well taught. So I guess even if I was 95, blind and half lame, I'd still be able to do serious practices and just continue that way. Because as you get older, and I see this in some of the older clergy, when you get to 60 or something, you're not going to learn anything new. You just haven't got the energy to do it. You haven't got the struggle left in you. You dissipate. That's simply a fact for almost all people. And from that point onwards, you will do whatever you know. You are not going to learn something new. So if what you know by that point is serious, sincere, well-taught, internal discipline, methods that actually come from traditional schools, from esoteric schools, if at that point that is what you know and that is what you do, you will continue it 60, 70, 80, 90. That will be very good. And if you're waiting, thinking that you have a lot of time, most likely you will pass that point and you will lose the ability to learn something new. That's simply a reality. I see it in myself, I see it in others. Gurdjieff says, thanks to this disease of tomorrow, the three-brained beings there, particularly the contemporary ones, almost always put off until later everything that needs to be done at the moment, being convinced that later they will do better and more. Even those unfortunates who, either by chance or owing to a conscious action from outside, become aware through their reason of their complete nullity and begin to sense it with all their separate spiritualized parts, and who happen to learn what being efforts must be made and how to make them in order to become such as is proper for three-brained beings to be. Even these beings, by putting off from tomorrow till tomorrow, almost all arrive at the point that one sorrowful day there arise and are manifest in them those forerunners of old age called feebleness and infirmity, which are the inevitable lot of all cosmic formations, great and small, towards the end of their completed existence. Here I must not fail to tell you about the strange phenomenon I noted during my observations and studies of the almost entirely degenerate presence of those favourites of yours. That is to say, I definitely established that in many of them, towards the end of their planetary existence, most of the consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer crystallized in their common presences atrophy of their own accord, and some of them even entirely disappear, thanks to which these beings begin to see and sense reality a little better. In such cases there appears in the common presence of these favourites of yours a strong desire to work upon themselves, to work, as they say, for the salvation of their souls. But needless to say, nothing can result from such desires of theirs, simply because it is already too late, the time allotted them for this purpose by great nature having already passed. And although they see and feel the necessity of making the required being efforts, yet for the fulfillment of these desires they now have only ineffectual yearnings and the lawful infirmities of old age. And I should say, when Gurdjieff talks about the disease of putting off things till tomorrow, one of the things he also mentions is that human beings are rush around all the time. But rushing around is not the solution to the disease of tomorrow. The solution is careful, responsible stewardship of your own life, to know what is coming, and to put yourself in the best trajectory towards it, to do serious things in a responsible way, to care for your life, to care for your soul. On the longevity of communities. As a matter of fact, The form of external existence of all the communities on the continent of Europe is scarcely to be distinguished from that of the beings of the large community, Russia. The form of existence of the beings of the various groups on this continent differ only in so far as the accidentally longer duration of existence of any community has allowed time for the automatic acquisition of certain good customs and instinctive habits which then become proper to the beings of that community alone. Here, by the way, it should be emphasized that the duration of existence of any community does indeed play an important role as regards the acquisition of good customs and instinctive habits. But, unfortunately for all the three-brained beings of the whole universe, whatever their degree of reason, the existence of any more or less organized group among them is in general short-lived, thanks, as always, to that chief particularity of theirs, namely, the periodic reciprocal destruction. As soon as good being usages begin to be established in the ordinary existence of any of their groups, this terrible process suddenly breaks out, and then either the good customs and habits automatically acquired during centuries are totally destroyed, or the beings of the given group, thanks to the aforementioned property of turkiness, fall under the influence of beings of another group having nothing in common with those under whose influence they were before. Therefore, all their customs and moral habits acquired during centuries are very soon replaced by new ones, which in most cases are half-baked and are good, as is said, only for a day. The disorganization inside my mind and an average person's mind, if pushed, becomes very painful. And when things are painful, people seek an escape. One escape is to indulge yourself, another escape is to blow things up. It's hard to see this stopping. There would have to be a large change in the recognition of how human beings function inside of them. Without that, there is no possibility of change. As it is today, humanity does simply not have enough knowledge about what is going on inside. That's simply a fact. In the Discourse, the Buddha talks about what is right, by which he means pay attention to these things. The first discourse of the Buddha to 5 ascetics after his enlightenment. Bhikkhus, these two extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness. What two? The pursuit of sensual happiness in sensual pleasure, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble, unbeneficial, and the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, unbeneficial. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, which leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. In what bhikkhus is that middle way awakened to by the Tathagata, which gives rise to vision, which leads to nibbana? It is this noble 8-fold path, that is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This, bhikkhus, is that middle way, awakened to by the Tathagata, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, which leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana.
confused.